Good afternoon for another session of the Real Estate Guys. I'm Trip Dunman, and I'm in Kansas City and joined by my friends Sean Johnston in Montana and Alan Jacobson in lovely Florida. And today we're going to, for our fifth episode, talk about something near and dear to all of our hearts, and that's what questions do you ask to a buyer's agent when you're hiring a buyer's agent to go represent you? What's important? And we're going to kind of cover it from a number of different angles today. But I thought, one thing that we went on to think about is, one, do I need an agent? And then secondly, if I do, what's important to be discerning in an agent? Because agents come in all flavors, um, all different sort of services, all sort of offerings. And in the new environment we're about to embark upon, it's important to know what your options are. So I'll flip it over to Sean. Sean, tell us a little bit about what do you think is, top one or two things that you would be asking if you were hiring a buyer's agent?
Well, it's funny when I was discussing this with Angie this morning in our office, and I said, "Boy, I'm so much of a listing agent. I wasn't exactly sure what the questions should be," and and she laughed at me and said, "Well, what's the big elephant in the room right now?" And so the big question I think most people are going to have to ask in all actuality, starting in just less than 60 days at this point, the new requirements are going to go into effect. And that's, what do you charge?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, so, I just want to throw something out. So that we got a little technical difficulty with Sean's video, but you can hear everything that he's saying, and so eloquently, of course, as Sean always is.
Am I am I lagging behind everybody?
There's something kind of going on there. Not
Okay.
100% sure, but welcome to the world of video and technology, folks. It's just the
Oh,
way it is. So makes you pay closer attention.
there you go.
I'll tell you something that if I were selling or I'm sorry, if I were buying a home, what I would be asking a buyer's agent is, what is your value proposition to me? Why should I hire you versus doing it on my own? What benefit is there? Which obviously, covers a lot of areas, but I would ask that, and I would ask, how do you, this is a really, I think, important question. How and why would you earn your commission?
Yeah, you've asked the really honestly the most important question, which is, what are you going to provide to me as my buyer's agent? We actually just put a property under contract that we listed on Friday. We put it under contract last night. We handled the list side, and part of our conversation with the seller was, do you want to have the same agent representing both sides of the transaction? Because he was talking to another agent that wanted to do both sides, was going to charge substantially more to handle both sides of the transaction than we were going to charge to only handle one side of it. And so what he realized as we worked through it was that agent was actually working for the buyer. That was their job, was to represent that buyer, to find the property, to get the questions answered that needed to be answered for the buyer. And in his case, not to necessarily represent the seller in the way that he was hoping for. So your question, what is it that you're going to provide for me, is really important. I know we have a list of things that we share with our buyers that we do for them, starting clear back at the very beginning of, how do you have a lender? Can we give you a list of people to talk to that can help you get started making sure that you can get lending, number one, and then how much you're going to be able to spend. And then it goes down the list from there, all the different layers of things that we're going to provide that buyer from the beginning all the way to the end of closing of the transaction. So, Trip, what are your thoughts on that? What are the critical questions that you think are important?
Yeah, and I appreciate your thoughts on that too. I always feel like I learn from you guys, being in a different state, but the concepts are applicable across the country here. One of the things that's always, as a listing agent, has always struck me is how few times that I see actual agents calling on off-market properties. So what I mean by that is it's pretty straightforward that most agents, if not all agents, have access to multiple listing service. They have access to scheduled showings for the homes. But what about those homes that are not on the multiple listing service? Because there's a whole sub-tier, a secondary market of those types of homes that could be a great or even a better fit for a buyer if they just knew how to access them. So my question I would ask the agent is do you have a strategy in place to access not only on-market properties, but off-market properties? And I think that once you find a bona fide strategy, that opens the world for people, and it often puts buyers in situations, especially in a competitive marketplace where they're competing for houses, perhaps finding some houses that they don't have to compete, that the terms are more favorable than they would get normally. So that would be an important question that I would be thinking about. I think back in terms of prior life in the consulting world, and we call these deliverables. What are the deliverables you're going to do for your fee? Very common in most businesses. The way the real estate industry has kind of evolved is it's been with the mutual co-op system, it's been fairly easy for the buy side traditionally to not have to show that so much. Well, now it's going to be imperative with the new environment we're going to experience August 17th. You've got to not only have, in my mind, a very knowledgeable buyer's agent, but you've got to have an agent that's got access into non-traditional sources to find that home for the buyer. So that was probably one of the bigger ones for me. And I think having an agent show their value is going to be critical. One other topic I thought might be really important to hit on is in this new world, one of the new requirements effective August 17th is that before a buyer's agent can show a buyer a home, they have to have a written agreement, a buyer's agency agreement in place that specifies what the commission is, what the term is, and various other items in there. But that wasn't the case in the past. So question for you, we'll start with Sean, is how do you think that affects these third-party portals that have traditionally sold data, the listing data, to agents that would just show up and meet them at the door? What kind of effect is that going to have?
Well, I think that's yet to be seen exactly what that's going to look like. But I think what it's going to create is likely a change in the way that buyers find an agent. So often, I think most people, when they click the button on, say, Zillow or Realtor, contact agent, they think they're actually contacting the seller's agent,
Mm-hmm.
the person that actually listed the home, and they have no idea that they've just clicked a button and some guy that's paying, $500, $1,000 a month, whatever it is. I did this back when I first got in the business, and I had somebody reach out to me to show one of the listings that I had. And I asked him, how he found the property. And well, my buyer pulled it up online. I'm like, oh, okay. And we did some research, figured out he was coming through Zillow. And then I went in and clicked on the button to see what would happen. And I had an agent call me. And neither myself or my co-listing agent got the message. So that's a long statement, but it's going to change the relationship that buyers have with their buyer's agent. And it's going to change the relationship and the way that these large portals interact with the marketplace. They are not there to provide free service. They are there to make money. And the only way they can make money is to sell that service to somebody who's willing to pay for access to the data. And to this point, the people that were willing to pay for access to that marketing were buyer's agents. Now that they're going to change those rules, or honestly have changed those rules, and they're going to affect now, you're going to see a big change in how that plays out. And so it's going to be really important for buyers to get familiar with how buying real estate works in this new environment, and how will the person that's representing you be compensated? Will you be the one compensating them? Will they work to negotiate other alternative ways of being compensated? Those are going to be questions I think that a lot of buyers are going to need to ask.
So to your point about, I lost my train of thought, but I lost my train of thought. What can I say? I was just thinking of that song, The A Train, and it just kind of threw. But to me, the most important things that buyers agents or buyers, excuse me, need to consider, and probably do consider, are time, knowledge, and money. These are the most important things to buyers. So, the questions to me would be centered around those. Like, how will a buyer's agent save me time? Because sure, if I'm a buyer, I can go and call the sellers. There's a way to do that. But is that the most efficient use of my time? Because if I work a job and I'm making, let's say for argument's sake, $100,000 a year, or I'm making $100 an hour, am I better off putting my time into my job and making money with what I do, and not specialize in, as opposed to something that I don't specialize in? How much time is that going to take away from me? So that's time. The other aspect is knowledge. Does the agent have the knowledge of what I'm looking for? Are they asking the right questions of me about what my ideal home is? Location, type of community, cultural activities around. There's so many questions that I know that I ask when I'm working with a buyer. And then money, besides the time that I'm spending, if I'm doing it on my own, that's taking away from my basic income, is how do you negotiate? How do you get me the most amount of, or not the most, I'm sorry, that's from the seller point of view, but how will you get me the best price on a home? How will you negotiate when it comes to inspections with repairs? These are the things that I think are the most important to buyers.
Yeah, and Alan, you raise a really good point on the time topic. And one of the things that seems maybe a little counterintuitive I'm about to bring up, but it's related to time, is I think this new arena that we're going to be embarking upon August 17th necessitates the need for a buyer's agency meeting between the buyer and the agent. It's almost required now, because in the past it was optional. Folks would sometimes not even know the client that was meeting at the door. Well, how would you ever, as a buyer's agent, understand your client's need if you don't meet with them? Also, it's a great opportunity to explain the process prior to ever going to see a home. And ultimately, you're going to, throughout the entire process, more efficiently use time, even though it has an upfront hour, hour and a half sort of requirement. It's going to be more fruitful. So the question that I would be asking a buyer's agent, if I'm looking for an agent, is, do you have a buyer's consultation meeting? And it will be interesting to see the varied responses that get to that, with probably some agents trying to not do that to save on time, but also kind of like building a faulty foundation. So to me, the importance of that buyer's agency consultation is going to be even more important now. And it's an opportunity for an agent to learn actually what the buyer is looking for. So the search becomes fruitful, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, if you put the shoe on the other foot,
Just to give you guys, we're at the 15-minute mark, so
okay. If you put the shoe on the other foot, if you're a seller, you're going to want to interview agents. And we agents go on listing appointments. Same thing with buyer in this new arena that we're going to be going into, that as a buyer, you should be interviewing agents and making sure that you are prepared with the right questions. And I know all three of us know not only the right questions they should ask, but we could also prompt them, and we would make sure that we give them as much information as possible to share our value proposition and how it's of benefit to them, as opposed to just like FSBOs, for sale by owners. I don't know what you would call a for buy by owner or for buy by buyer. You know, it's something they have to really consider very carefully. And I know one of you mentioned about, I think it might have been you, Trip, mentioned about, you know, there are ways to negotiate paying the buyer's agent in the negotiation process of putting an offer in on a home. So, you know, we have the knowledge, and I think anybody out there that is watching us, you know, if you're looking for someone to help you buy a home, reach out to us, because we could take you through the process. Even if you end up not going with any of us, which I don't think you will, but if you don't, we can help guide you.
yes, I think that's going to be the interesting part moving forward. Is I feel like in our current world, if you will, that people think, oh, well, I can just, in fact, I just had this happen a week and a half ago. We had a potential client that we were working on listing their home for. They'd been going back and forth on whether they're going on the market. And then they called us out of the blue and said, hey, we decided to buy some land and we're going to go ahead and list the house in July. And I'm putting all the paperwork together for my purchase. Let's get together and talk in July about listing our home. And immediately we were like, oh, I called them and said, well, talk to me about your buy. And they were just doing some paperwork all by themselves and didn't have any idea of the potential hazards that they were putting themselves in. Not having title insurance, not, working with the title company to make sure that that the seller had clear title and could in fact sell the property to them, those kinds of things. And so I think there's a lot of us, myself included, I bought and sold a lot of real estate back in the day without a realtor involved. And had varying things that popped up that I had no idea were even out there, and that did in fact impact me on a couple of occasions. So that's really the value that I think people, it's hard for somebody to know what they don't know. I didn't know what I didn't know. And once I learned the things that I knew, I realized how much risk I had put myself in. And in one case, actually bought a property that was in a floodplain and realized the only person that could buy it was the person next door. Things like that happen where people just don't know what they don't know. And that's where having a professional help you through the process. And this couple that I was just talking about, once we talked through just the title concerns and some of the things that I had seen happen, they immediately changed their approach and said, boy, we really want somebody to walk us through this process. And there's value in uh, in contracting somebody to do that with and for us. So
Yeah, Sean, you reminded me when you mentioned the land. I too have dealt with some land deals, and one of the things that a buyer that doesn't have an agent may not know is, are there, at least in our area, soil perking requirements? And the magnitude, if you don't know that and you go through and sign a contract and move on, and there's say a $60,000 septic mound requirement that's edicted by the county. If you don't know that, you're going to have a $60,000 bill on your hands that you didn't expect. And that was actually the case of one of the deals that we were working on in the past. So it just reminds me of, there's some very unique specialties that a good agent is going to provide that value that you won't think of ahead of time until it's there. And you don't realize it until it's a problem. So do the due diligence up front, look for the good agent, ask the right questions, and then embark on a more efficient and joyful path, if you will.
Yeah, I'm going to add one land thing before we wrap it up, because you guys had a couple doozies and I got a doozy too. So I also had done some land sales back in 03, 04 or so. And I had one where we were representing a developer looking at a large tract of land, and there's an eagle's nest smack in the middle of it. And you can buy the property because it's a large property, but there's a certain perimeter around it that you cannot do anything with. So that all you can really do maybe is put some water in there, but you cannot build in there. So I'm sure most of our people are not land developers or looking to buy land. They're probably looking to buy homes. And the point of it all is that when you're working to a home is a big purchase. It's one of the biggest purchases of your life. And you want to work with a professional, just like anything. If you need a lawyer or you need an accountant, you want to make sure that you maximize minimize your time, maximize the knowledge that you need, and maybe even save some money, because ultimately you will save money. So
yeah, that's a really good point. And I just icing on the cake. You were saying we all use the land explanation, but my very first transaction as a licensed real estate agent in the state of Montana, the seller did not have clear title to sell the property. And it took 9 months and $11,000 to get clear title for the buyer. And so it does happen. It does come up. And I was reminded as you were talking, I was thinking, what do they say? The person who is how does it go? They represent, if you represent yourself in court, you have a fool for a client, something like that.
something along those lines.
Right. And so
100%.
right. And I've been that guy who was a fool. And it's if I've learned anything over the last 20 years, buying and selling real estate, having a professional involved has always saved me money in the long run. So anyway,
Absolutely.
we'll leave it at that. But
I think that does it, right, guys?
yeah, I think that covers most of it. If you have questions and you're looking for answers to anything real estate related, don't hesitate to reach out to any one of us. We would be happy to help you. And we also have a network throughout the country, not just in Florida, Montana, and Kansas City. We would be happy to connect you with somebody that's pre-vetted that can help you with whatever real estate needs you might have. So,
Right.
Tripp,
So
wanna wrap us up?
catch up on our previous episodes. Our last episode in this little arc of buying and selling was what to look for and questions to ask a selling agent, someone who would list for you. And our next episode next week is questions to ask if you're an investor. And that's going to be really, really important. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.